The Tennis Gambling Podcast and the Sports Game Podcast Network is brought to you by Nordic Fantasy. Sign up with the promo code SGPN, score up to $1,000 bonus cash. We're also brought to you by Rhythm. Get your 70 free trial today by going to sportsgambling.com/rhythm, sportsgambling.com/RATHMM. And welcome, everybody, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast here on the Sports Game Podcast Network. It's currently Tuesday afternoon, roughly 2 p.m. Eastern Time on September 24th. I'm your host, always, Scott Reichel, once again going solo for this pod. Should be a fun episode because it is time to get into the first of two ATP events for the upcoming week. We're going to do Tokyo in this one, Beijing in the next one. Point is that Tokyo does start tonight, or maybe technically past midnight. So point is starts in about 10 hours, give or take. So we're going to do the breakdown now for the outrights. We have quarter odds, by the way. So we're going to get into the quarters and the actual outrights for the Tokyo event, which is otherwise known as the Japan Open. Anyway, before we get into the actual breakdown of the event, I want to remind you once again to like, subscribe on YouTube, and a reminder that if you're still listening to the podcast audio only, you can still rate the podcast on Spotify or Apple. So you can leave some feedback, please do so. Definitely appreciate it. But a reminder that we do live streams on YouTube and that we do have, of course, a bunch of episodes per week at this point, covering for 250s and for 500s. We're going to do the outrights, then the quarters, semis, and final, and then for 1000s and for Grand Slams, we cover every round. So if you're new to the show, welcome. Hopefully you enjoy the content. Either way, don't forget to leave some feedback. And if you are new, hopefully you hit the subscribe button. Anyway, a reminder, check out the SGPN merch store as well. A lot of great Tennis Gambling Podcast merch with sweatshirts, t-shirts, and mugs. Also have a lot of great content from other shows. For example, the NBA show, which I am on. And we're going to have an episode actually on Thursday, first division preview. Believe it or not, the NBA season's like a month away. So we're going to start the off-season episode. So keep that in mind if you do like some NBA coverage. Also, WNBA Gambling Podcast. We did an episode, Terrell and I, for the Tuesday and Wednesday games. So check out that as well. You can find those episodes on the NBA Gambling Podcast YouTube channel as well. Anyway, before we get into the actual recap, do want to remind you once again that we do have a brand new show with the network, as Doug Stanhope, Brandon Walsh, and Sean Green host the newest podcast on SGPN. Get to the points every Thursday before the game. Doug, Brandon, and Sean will give out their favorite plays and talk a bunch of crap to each other. Doug and Brandon are professional comedians you might know from the Joe Rogan podcast, the Howard Stern Show, and Comedy Central. Subscribe if you do get your podcast. Anyway, time to get into the actual recap of the last episode. Overall, a fantastic episode for us. We were waiting for the sweep. We kept winning one of the two plays in the lock and dog segment, and then we finally got both of them home in the finale, as we ended up seeing in the Tuesday matches basically what we expected to happen. We saw Cilic win outright. We did like him on the lock, plus 2.5 games at minus 140. Absolutely free. You saw Zhang have 0 breaks in the entire match, and Cilic got the job done there as he won 7-6, 7-6. It's a nice win there for Cilic. I'll go further into detail on that in a second. For the dog, though, took the home country guy, did take Zhang on the money line against Musetti at plus 110 as he won in straight sets. The first set was pretty much what I expected. It was going to be a breaker, but I thought it was going to be a competitive match. Second set, not so much. It seemed like Musetti kind of ran out of gas, and Zhang eventually just outlasted him as he won in straight sets. But Musetti, in general, had a pretty easy path in the entire event. Zhang had a difficult path, and he looked a lot sharper in the tournament in general, based on the eye test. Plus, Musetti, we know, does love to stand very far back on the court, and with that being the case, Zhang was able to be the aggressor in most of the rallies, where Musetti was kind of on the back foot, had a hard time of actually becoming the, I'd say, attacker in these points, and eventually Zhang was just too solid, and he got the job done to win his first ever title. So overall, nice overall breakdown for the two matches, as we got everything right with the exception of Zhang and Musetti over. Thought the match would be a bit more competitive, but Zhang got the job done, and so did Cilic, so we ended up sweeping the finals in Chengdu and Hangzhou. Anyway, to get into the more detailed portion, you do have the actual, I'd say, context behind both wins. Both pretty important. Cilic actually set a record, set ATP history, became the lowest ranked player ever to win an ATP title, as he was ranked 777th. Of course, he flew up hundreds of spots now, but the point is he now is the official record holder of the highest ranked, or the lowest ranked player to ever win an ATP title, which is pretty cool. As for Zhang, he won his first ever ATP title. We knew it was around the corner, as we knew how talented he was. Gave him out of Winston-Salem, which was about a month or two ago. So we knew it was on the horizon. We knew the talent was there, and he stayed healthy as he got the job done in his home country, while only dropping one set in the entire process. Now, Cilic, I mentioned in the last episode, not going to repeat everything I said in the last episode, but I do want to at least mention again, Cilic has been one of the more underrated players on tour for the last decade and a half or so. Did win a Grand Slam title. Happy for him. Won the U.S. Open, but he also made a couple Grand Slam finals. Feel like he was one of those guys that was kind of just stuck in the shadow of the big three. And if you want to include Murray in there too, you can. Point is, though, Cilic has been really good for a really long time, and I feel like he's been underrated for most of his career. Future Hall of Famer. Now he has officially won, I believe, 21 ATP titles. He's won a Grand Slam, won a Masters 1000 title, former top 3 player in the world. Future Hall of Famer. Nice to see him healthy and nice to see him back on track. He's supposed to play in Tokyo. We'll see how he does, at least physically, and if he chooses to actually show up. But the point is, nice for Cilic and nice for Shang. Two guys on the opposite, I'd say, spectrum of their respective careers. Cilic towards the end, as I think he's 35, and Shang is still a teenager. So once again, hopefully we'll end up seeing Cilic win more events, or at least stay healthy, bare minimum, for the future of his career. As for the other, once again, option there for Shang, I think he's a future top 10 player in the world, and I think that this is the first of many titles he's going to win in his career. He is really, really good. So we're going to see how he ends up looking for the rest of his career. Hopefully the health stays there. I compared him to Draper in the last episode, which I feel like is a pretty good comp. Two young guys, very talented, a lot of upside. The main issue has been durability for their respective careers, but Shang is only 19 years old. He is going to be a problem in this tour for a long time. Probably going to be a top 10 player within the next couple of years. Keep an eye out for him. And I do think, once again, he will win multiple ATP titles over the course of the next few years. Anyway, time to get into the actual breakdown of the event in Tokyo. Before getting into that, though, do want to remind you once again that we are brought to you by Nordic Fantasy, because they have Pick'em, and with their Pick'em, they have a lot of options on their menu. They now have first touchdown projections. They have a ton of ways to win with the NFL, college football, MLB, MMA, and more. Also, of course, you have WNBA and tennis. Their lobby is jam-packed with profit boosts and no sweat entries. You can now use specials and boosts on all your flex entries. I'll probably do something with, you know what, we'll go with Jewel Lloyd lower. 7.5 rebounds and assists for Game 2 tonight. Gave that out for Game 1, worked out. I'll run it back for my entry in Game 2. Reminder, though, that when you sign up, you should use the promo code SGPN to claim your special pick and a first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 bonus cash on Fantasy promo code SGPN. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast. Just finished recapping what happened in the final on Tuesday in Chengdu and Hangzhou. Now it's time for the breakdown of the event in Tokyo. So starting off with the recent winners, you had Shelton beating Karatsev in the final last year. I believe Shelton beat Sinner earlier in that event, and then he ended up managing to beat a Cinderella run by Karatsev, but nice win there by Shelton to win a title. You saw Fritz beat Tiafoe 2 years ago. Then you had COVID issues, had Djokovic beating Millman and Medvedev beating Nishikori. So you have seen a decent amount of competition over the years based on overall, I'd say, ranking, just based on how deep the field actually is. However, this event does overlap with Beijing. So Sinner, for example, is in Beijing. So you're not going to see a truly stacked field, but you're going to see a pretty solid field in general. So just keep that in mind for the event. Point is, though, Shelton's defending champion, and he is back in this event. So we'll see if he can defend his title as he's taking on Opelka in the first round. Anyway, point is to get into the actual quarter odds for this event. Starting off with the first quarter. This is the Fritz quarter, and for this one, you have Fritz at plus 162. You have Shelton at 175. You have Berrettini at 5-1. Darderi at 10-1, Fees at 11-1, Opelka at 18-1, Navone 20-1, and Dzanchulp at 22-1. So first things first, toss out the last three guys. Opelka, he's been in bad form recently. Navone doesn't really succeed on hard court, and Dzanchulp beat Alcaraz in an extremely fluky outcome because he's been bad ever since. So going through the first quarter, Fritz, I do think, is worthy of being the favorite. We saw him, of course, make a deep run to the U.S. Open final. Saw him win this title a couple years ago, and he also looked pretty good in the Laver Cup as he was able to beat Zverev, for example. So he has been in good form. Shelton, I think, has been kind of up and down for the course of the season, but we know that he definitely thrives in these late-season hard-court events. But I do think his draw is not the most favorable, as we're looking at him facing off against Opelka in the first round, which might not be the easiest. Did beat Opelka earlier this season. Now, if you do think Shelton can end up getting past Opelka, he has a pretty decent path to face off against Fritz in the quarters. But I think Fritz is better than him by a decent margin. So I do think that Shelton is not worth taking, in my opinion. Now, the argument that you have for anybody else in this overall quarter, Do I think Berrettini has a chance? Because Darderi, no chance. He's been in really bad form for the last couple months. Fees, I don't trust enough, and he faces off against Fritz in the first round. So I'm going to toss out Darderi and Fees as well, which takes you down to Fritz, Shelton, and Berrettini. Now, Fritz destroyed Berrettini in the U.S. Open, and I think Shelton is not good enough to beat Fritz's current form. So with that being the case, I'm simply going to toss out everybody besides Chalk in this quarter. I am going to go with Fritz at plus 162 as my choice for the first quarter. Been in good form. We were wondering if he would potentially have a mental lapse after losing in the final in the U.S. Open, but he did not. Fritz overall has looked pretty good. I thought that he looked good in the Laver Cup as well. I know it's an exhibition. Still beats Zverev, though, again. So we have seen him play pretty well. Lost to Alcaraz, no shame in that, but we saw him show up for the Laver Cup. He looked pretty good, and now I think he has a pretty decent path to make a deep run, potentially for a second title here. So I am going to go with Fritz as the only option for the first quarter. Moving on to the second quarter, which is, I think, one of the more open quarters in the entire event. So for the second quarter, you have Felix as the favorite at plus 225. You have Ruud at about 330. You have Rune at 370. You have Nishikori at 7-1. Thompson 10-1. Nishioka at 12-1. And you have Cilic at around 12-1. So for this quarter, Felix has been in good form lately, mostly in Davis Cup action, but I do want to mention that quickly because Felix has been playing good tennis, and we do know that he is a solid hardcourt player. The issue is he's a choker, and you can't really trust him. But in the Davis Cup, he definitely put Canada on his back because he beat Draper in straight sets, beat Vartanen in straight sets, and beat Baez in straight sets. So the Draper one's very impressive. Vartanen's been fine. But I think Baez, we know, has been pretty rough since the clay season ended. So still won in straight sets in all those matches. So I think he's in pretty good form. Did lose early to Mensik in the U.S. Open and did lose to Draper in Cincinnati on that controversial double bounce on match point. So he avenged that loss in Cincinnati, but we saw him look pretty good on hard court for the last couple weeks. And I think he makes sense as the favorite in this overall quarter, especially based on his overall draw. Felix in the first round has a matchup against Nishioka, then a matchup against either Rune or Tabilo, and then a matchup against either Ruud, Thompson, Cilic, or Nishikori. So definitely that top, I'd say, section of the second quarter is the tough section. And I feel like this is a very open quarter, mainly because I want nothing to do with Ruud and Rune, who have been awful for the last couple months. So I am tossing out Ruud and Rune. And Nishikori, I understand that he has the home country advantage, but I don't know if I actually trust his overall form at this stage in his career to win multiple matches that should be competitive in this event. So I'm going to pass on Nishikori as well, going to pass on Rune, passing on Ruud. So I am going to go with some long shots here. I am going to start off with the favorite. I am going to go with Felix at plus 225. Like his form, think that he has a decent path, and 225 is a good deal. Good head-to-head numbers as well against Nishioka, so I do think he has a pretty decent path to make it to the semis. But I am going to go with the long shots here. I am going to go with Thompson at 10-1, and I am going to go with Cilic at 12-1. Now, Cilic is dangerous because, of course, he just won a title, and you have to wonder about fatigue. But Nishikori being this big of a favorite in the first round, I think, is a little bit disrespectful to Cilic because Nishikori's been fine since coming back to the ATP Tour. Hasn't been amazing by any means, but I think Cilic has a pretty decent, I'd say, path if he gets past Felix in the second round, potentially. But 12-1, I think, is a good price. And I do think that Thompson, who's been good on hard court this season, won a hard court title, made a hard court final in in Atlanta as well. So I think he's in good form. And he does have Ruud in the first round, who's been a complete disaster. But I'll fade Ruud, and I do think that you might see fatigue play factor, or maybe you'll just see Nishikori win. And I think Thompson can beat Nishikori. So I am going to go with the longer shots here, with Felix sprinkled in. So once again, my picks for the second quarter, the opposite of the first quarter. I'm going to go with the chalk at 225, but two long shots. Give me Thompson at 10-1, and give me Cilic at 12-1. Complete fade of Rune and Ruud. Moving on to the third quarter, you have a pretty interesting quarter as well, because the favorite in this quarter is Tommy Paul at around plus 185. You have Tsitsipas at a 370. You have Byron at 5-1, Arnaldi at 750, and Echeverry at 11-1. Now, Paul's been good this season. And I do think that it is worth mentioning that I think Paul makes sense to be the favorite in this quarter. However, do I think 185 is a good price? You could argue yes, but I think Arnaldi in the first round, followed by Pyron and Makic, and then you're looking at potentially Tsitsipas in the quarters. Not the most favorable draw there. I think Arnaldi, we know, is pretty dangerous on hard court. Paul should beat him, but Arnaldi definitely has the game to beat anybody if he is clicking on the right day. Pyron did win a 1,000 title a couple of months ago. in Canada, and Makic, we know, got injured in the Davis Cup, but he was in pretty good form, made a pretty deep run in the U.S. Open. So the point is, not exactly the best draw for Paul, so I think I am going to pass on him there at this price. Instead, I am going to go with the guy that I mentioned, won a 1,000 title a couple of months ago. I am going to go with Papiron at around 5-1 in that overall section, but I think I'm going to do it because I think his draw is pretty favorable. I'm going to hold my nose and take Tsitsipas. I know it's dangerous. I know that he's been terrible for the last couple months, but 370 is a very good price for his draw. Just hear me out. Has Mickelson in the first round, which I know can be tricky, but Mickelson is not a great serve. Is really not a great server, and I think Tsitsipas can beat him. Did beat Kokkinakis in the Laver Cup, so maybe he has regained some form that he lost in the last couple months, but I think that 370 is too good of a price. If he ends up beating Mickelson in the first round, then he faces off against O'Connell or Etcheverry. Very favorable draw for Tsitsipas to make it to the quarters, and with that price point, I got to take it. I understand that he's not trustworthy, and I know that he's a psychopath, and we roast him on the show all the time, but 370 is a good price. I'll take the value at that current number, and for the second option, give me Pyron at 5-1. I think it's a good price. Makic has battled some injuries recently, and you are looking at Papiron, who I think has the game to beat Paul in what could be a competitive matchup. So give me Papiron at 5-1 as my second choice in the third quarter. Moving on to the last quarter. This one is, in my opinion, the most open one. Not maybe based on long shot odds, but just based on overall talent in the quarter. So you have Hurkacz as the favorite at 225. You have Draper at 300. You have Tiafoe at 370. You have Humbert at 450. You have Nakashima at 550. So once again, 5 guys that are very, very competitive that might end up having just wars against each other in this quarter. You have Giron at 16-1, and you have Mochizuki at 40-1. So for this actual quarter, a lot of potential drama, a lot of overall, I'd say, unpredictability expected for this quarter. Now, Hurkacz face off against Giron in the first round, should win that one. He's dominated head-to-head, so I think that Hurkacz should advance to the second round. Then you have Draper against Bellucci, which should be fun. Draper, we saw lose to Felix at a competitive Davis Cup match, and we saw him make a deep run in the U.S. Open to the semis. I think Draper is a player that should beat Bellucci, probably in straight sets. I just think he's too solid, and I think you're looking at what should be a war between Draper and Hurkacz. Now, for the other section of the quarter, you have Tiafoe against Nakashima in the first round, which is not easy. And you have Mochizuki against Humbert. Humbert should win that one, and then you have a potentially fun match between Tiafoe or Nakashima against Humbert in the round of 16. So for this actual quarter, a lot of options, a lot of ways you can go about it. But I am going to go with the favorite here at Hurkacz plus 225, and I am going to go with Draper at 3-1. You could argue that Tiafoe has some value, but facing off against potentially Nakashima, Humbert, and then either Hurkacz or Draper, that's a really tough overall path. And Tiafoe at 370, I kind of wanted a bit more. I was kind of hoping for 4-1 or maybe even 450. Didn't get it though, so I'm not going to force it. Instead, I'm just going to go with the guys who I think have the best chance of making it through the actual quarter. I'm going to go with Hurkacz at 225, who I think has the overall serve to make people very uncomfortable. And I do think that his serve should definitely be a weapon, a serious weapon in this quarter, and hopefully he's healthy. He's battled injuries for the last couple months. Draper, though, has been in questionable form since the U.S. Open, but we know what the upside is. We know that his game translates well to the hard court season, and I do think that Draper is definitely live to win this at 3-1. So I'm going to go with a pretty tricky quarter. I'm going to go with the 2 favorites here based on odds, just based on who I trust the most. Tiafoe did regain some trust in the U.S. Open and even at Cincinnati making to the final, but I do think the path is difficult, so I am going to go with Hurkacz and Draper as my 2 options. Yes, they play each other in the second round, but I do think that you're looking at what should be a pretty good path for one of them to get by if they beat the opposition in the second round. So I am going to go with Hurkacz at 25 and Draper at 3-1. So once again, my picks for the outrights here. For the first quarter, I am going to go with Fritz by himself at 162. For the second quarter, I'm going to go with Felix at 225 and Thompson at 10-1, as well as Cilic at 13-1. For the third quarter, give me Tsitsipas at 370 and Papiron at 5-1. And for the last quarter, I am going to go with Hurkacz at 225 and I'm going to go with Draper at 3-1. Anyway, time to get into the actual outrights for the winning of the event. Starting off with the actual odds, you have Fritz as the favorite, as he's around plus 450. Paul's at 8-1. Draper's at 9-1. Hurkacz is 9-1. So I find that fascinating that Draper and Hurkacz have the same odds to win the title when Hurkacz's odds are cheaper to win the quarter. I find that's kind of fascinating. Sheldon's 9-1. Tiafoe's 12-1. Felix is 12-1. Tsitsipas is 14-1. You have Ruud at 14-1, Berrettini at 16-1, Rune at 16-1. You have Papiron at 18-1, Nakashima at 22-1, Humbert at 25-1, Arnaldi 28-1, Thompson at 30-1. You kind of get the point. Now, if you want to go for some long shots, Cilic to go back-to-back is 40-1. If you want to throw in the home country guy, Nishikori is 50-1. So for the actual outrights, of course, we're going to repeat some of the quarter winners that we ended up having earlier. The question is which one? Now, there was one that I was torn on. I decided to leave him off the list, but instead I'm going to mention the guys that I mentioned before to win some quarters. Give me Fritz at 5-1. Right now he's playing a top 10 player in the world. Saw him beat Zverev in the Laver Cup, and we saw him make the US Open final. Also former champion, like the path. That's why I'm taking him by himself to win the first quarter. I think he's got value. Give me Fritz at 5-1 to win this event. Shopping around once again, trying to find the best price. Now for the other ones, I believe Fritz was 5-1 on Bet365, I think. Now, for the other ones, I am going to go with Hurkacz at 10-1, and I am going to go with Draper at 12-1. So, yes, one of them will lose prior to the quarterfinals automatically, but I do think Hurkacz and Draper have the overall games to have success on these courts. I think Draper, if he stays healthy, can beat anybody on hard court, and we saw, for example, Shang channel his overall talent for a title, his first ever. We saw Draper win a grass title earlier this season. Point is, though, if Draper's healthy, he can beat anybody, and I do think that you might see a competitive matchup between Hurkacz and Draper, but I think one of them has a shot to win the entire tournament. So I am going to go with both of them at 10-1 and 12-1, respectively. And for the last one, give me Felix at 14-1. Like his form, saw it in the Davis Cup, and I do think that he has the overall game and overall just, I'd say, skill set to beat anybody on these courts in Tokyo. Good enough for me. Give me Felix at 14-1. Now, the one I was contemplating was Tsitsipas, which was mostly based on a rogue line. Most books had 12-1 or 14-1. Bet365 did have 20-1 on Tsitsipas. The problem is I don't trust him enough to actually back him. But if you want some value just based on shopping around, Tsitsipas at 20-1 has some value on Bet365. Chose not to do it, though, at the last minute. So once again, my picks for the outrights are going to be on Fritz at 5-1, Hurkacz at 10-1, Draper at 12-1, and Felix at 14-1. That's going to wrap it up for the actual outrights for Tokyo. Now it's time for the lock and dog picks for the first round. But for that one, remember once again that we are brought to you by BetUS, newest sponsor of the SGPN. And a reminder that they've been around for 30 plus years. They have a lot of very easy ways to deposit through crypto. You can get lightning fast payouts. You can also support SGPN and get yourself another great sportsbook by signing up at BetUS. Great promo that we have currently with BetUS. Use our link to sign up and get a 1 to 25% deposit bonus on your first 3 deposits, which is a phenomenal deal. Go to sportsgamblebus.com/BetUS. That's sportsgamblebus.com/BetUS. Promo code SGPN so they know we send you. BetUS, America's favorite sportsbook. We're also brought to you by Rhythm. SGPN's proud partner, Rhythm, is the #1 AI-powered sports betting platform that helps provide bettors of all levels the ability to build your own custom predictive models. In seconds, they get predictions on moneyline, spread, total, and props. Build your own model, copy one of the top performing models from the leaderboard, or you can build your own model, or you could actually just build a model that Rhythm actually just makes for you, which gives you predictions on every game and player props. A reminder, they have a bunch of stats, research, trends, analysis to give you even more betting insight. And a reminder to claim your 7-day free trial today by going to sportsgamblers.com/Rhythm, sportsgamblers.com/RITHM. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast. Just finished going through the outrights for the Japan Open. Now it's time for the lock and dog picks for the first round. Now, a reminder, the matches are actually very, very, I'd say, intriguing. A lot of them in the first round. So there really are not many, I'd say, complete duds. It feels like a lot of the matches in the first round could be drama-filled. But I am going to go with a moneyline play for my lock. I am actually going to go with a guy that I've kind of been roasting on the show for months or years at this point. But I think Tiafoe's turned a corner, and he's facing off against Nakashima in the first round. Give me Tiafoe on the money line at -135. Couple reasons why. First of all, I like how he's played for the last couple of months. Did make the U.S. Open semi, was one set away from the final. He also beat Medvedev in the Laver Cup, and we saw him have a pretty competitive showing against Zverev, I believe. Points, though, he's playing good tennis, best tennis he's played all year, and most importantly, he owns the head-to-head against Nakashima. They faced off 5 times in their careers, all 5 meetings on hard court, and Tiafoe is 5-0. So Tiafoe has owned Nakashima in the head-to-head, and I think that based on the current form of both guys, yes, Nakashima's played well, still not the best returner. I just think when the match gets competitive, I kind of trust Tiafoe more in the big moments than Nakashima, and I do think that Tiafoe, being a former runner-up here in 2022, does give me belief that his skill set will translate more seamlessly to the courts here in Japan. So I am going to go with Tiafoe on the money line to -135. Warning, if Tiafoe loses, he's officially back in the, I'd say, ban book. But I am going to go with Tiafoe to get the job done. I see Cayetano mentioning that he thinks the match might go over. I don't mind that either, but I do think that Nakashima might have a mental lapse somewhere in there. And looking at the total, I believe it's around 23, 23 and a half. I could see it ending 7-6, 6-4. I could see that being a realistic outcome, but I think that Tiafoe is definitely right now the more trustworthy guy in my opinion, which is saying a lot for me. Because, I've roasted Tiafoe on the show for years, but I like how he's played. He's faced off against good competition, and I do think that Nakashima, despite playing well recently, for example, in the last event, we saw him lose to Chilich, who of course won the entire tournament, but look at who he's actually played. Beat Ichikata, beat Wong, beat Marter, beat Kovalik, beat Tabilo, who's been in pretty bad form lately. Really hasn't faced off against many solid players recently over the last couple weeks. I do agree that Nakashima is not exactly a slouch, but I think that Tiafoe's challenged himself a bit more with the U.S. Open and the Laver Cup, so I am going to go with him at -135. Back in the guy that is currently 5-0 in the head-to-head to make it 6-0 at -135. For the dog, though, I am going to go with one of the guys I mentioned for a long shot to win the quarter. He is a dog in the first round, but it's a pretty cheap number when you look at the actual rankings of both guys. I am going to go to Thompson on the money line at +132, mostly fading Ruud at this point. Now, you're looking at the head-to-head, it's been very competitive. They've split all 6 meetings, but Thompson did beat Ruud earlier this season in Mexico, actually, an event that Thompson won. Thompson beat Ruud earlier this season on hardcourt. Believe that was the final of the event. Point is, though, Thompson has proven, even when Ruud was in good form, he can beat Ruud, and he matches up pretty well. So with that being the case, I do like the value on Thompson. That's not even including how bad Ruud's been lately, because Ruud has been awful lately. He's lost 3 of the last 4 matches, including a Davis Cup loss to Rocha, Portuguese guy ranked 168th, lost in straight sets. Ruud has been atrocious, and I feel like looking at the overall form and the price, they're definitely picking Thompson to have some value, because you figure based on ranking, Ruud against Thompson, probably like -200, -210. Not so much, because once again, Ruud has been a complete lost cause. He has no confidence right now, and Thompson, I know, has not been as good lately as he was in the past couple months. Made a final in Atlanta, won a title in Mexico, and we saw him make a pretty respectable run in the U.S. Open before losing to de Minaur. So based on the overall form and based on the price, I like Thompson here. I'll fade Ruud. I was going to fade Rune as well, but Tabilo has not been in great form either recently. So I'm going to go with Thompson instead on the money line. I think that Ruud, once again, until he proves to me that mentally he is, I'd say, back on track, I can't back the guy. I just think Ruud is not exactly a great option right now. Rick mentioning that Ruud's not a great hardcore player. Within reason. Of course, he's definitely best on clay. Did make a U.S. Open final a couple years ago. Did make a decent run in the U.S. Open this past year. But I do agree with you. Ruud is fine on hard court. I do think that Ruud is not exactly the most comfortable on hard court right now. And based on the overall form, I think +132, kind of auto-fading Ruud, is worth something to me, especially when you saw Thompson beat him earlier this season on hard court and you saw them split the first 6 meetings. So with that being the case, give me Thompson to get the job done. And hopefully we see Ruud's free fall continue on, or I should say in Japan for this event. So once again, the Lock and Dog picks for this episode. The lock's going to be on Tiafoe money line at -135 on Nakashima. Shouldn't be easy, but he's 5-0 lifetime. I'll back that angle for Tiafoe at -135. And for the dog, give me Thompson money line against Ruud at +132. That's going to wrap it up. You can find me once again on Twitter at Reichel Radio. A reminder that we are going to have another outright episode in either a couple hours or tomorrow. We'll see what happens. But Beijing is taking place as well. So Japan starts one day before. So keep that in mind. So we're going to have another outright episode in either later tonight or potentially tomorrow. But the point is we will have another outright episode, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, told you to find me on Twitter. You can also find me on the NBA show, which we're going to have some episodes on. It's off-season times. We're going to break down the divisions, and we're going to do the Southeast Division first. Munaf and I on Thursday. Besides that, WNBA show, playoff time there. So check that out on the same YouTube channel, the NBA SGPN channel. Also, of course, you can find me on the MLB show. Playoff time's around the corner. Going to do some episodes there for, of course, World Series predictions as well as actual game and series breakdowns. Until next time, though, good luck to all of you and all of your bets. Bye, everyone.